Welcome to our bubble candle tutorial. For this project you will need your bubble candle moulds, some pillar soy wax, so it's important that it's pillar wax, not container wax, because this is better at making a standalone candle. I use 170 grams per candle, so in total here I've got 340 grams. You'll also need a metal jug to melt your wax in, and a small pot to create a double boiler. This is how we'll melt the wax, and also I've got some lolly sticks here to stir my wax with. I've also got some pink dye and some green dye. You could use whatever colours you like. I've got my candle wicks here, and I've got some pegs to centre the wicks as well. You'll also need a kitchen scale to complete the project. Let's get started. So I'm going to start by putting my wick into my mould. Now I've made a little hole with a skewer in the middle of this middle bubble here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop the end of the wick through the little hole there from the inside. So you can see, I don't know if you can, I've got a little hole. Now you don't want too big a hole or the wax will pour out, so a really small, I'm just going to thread that through, there you go, and then pull it, the wick through to the other side. I've got my kind of wick stapler here, and what I'm going to do is kind of straighten the wick as much as you can in the candle holder, and then I'm going to take a peg and just peg it in place on the top there, so that's kind of straight. You can even pull it a bit more if you need to. And then that is kind of ready for us to pop our wax into. The next thing I'm going to do is I am going to weigh out 50 grams of my wax into my little metal jug here. So I've got my wax weighed out in my little jug now, and I'm going to bring in a small saucepan and make a double boiler to melt the wax. So I'm going to fill up my small saucepan halfway with boiling water. Now please do be careful when you're working with boiling water and boiling wax, because it can cause serious burns. So I've filled that up with water, and I'm going to pop my little jug into the water and pop it on a medium heat on the hob until the wax is melted. And you know the wax is melted because it turns clear, and you'll notice this happening as you do it. So I'm going to go and pop this on the hob and melt my wax. So now you can see that the wax is melted, so it's completely liquid, and now we're ready to pour our first layer into our candle. So I can pop that to the side for now. So I'll bring back the mould that we did earlier. And because our first layer of our ombre, or the top layer, is white, we don't need to add any colouring to our wax. So I'm just going to go ahead and carefully pour it straight into the mould. There we go. So I'm just pouring enough wax up to that kind of first bubble section. So you'll notice on the side of your mould you can almost see through, there's like a kind of first section, and that's where we've poured our wax up to. But the 50 grams of wax should kind of just go straight up to there anyway, so you shouldn't have to worry too much about kind of measuring it out or anything. So now we need to pop that to the side to set. Probably takes about half an hour-ish, maybe 20 minutes to kind of set enough that we can put our next layer on top. So as before, I've measured out 50 grams of my soy wax into the little jug, and I'm going to melt it just as before in our double boiler on the hob on a medium heat. Again, being super careful not to burn myself with the wax or the water. So you can see now that I've melted that 50 grams of wax down to liquid, and I'm going to add a few flakes of the pink dye. Now we want a really pale colour in the middle because this is an ombre candle. So you'll literally need a few flakes. So, oh, that's far too much. Probably, I don't know, that many? It's really hard to weigh because they're so light, so just a couple. You can see I've only got a wee drop there. I'm gonna pour them in and stir them around so that they melt. You should see them melting quite easily. But make sure that they're completely absorbed before you kind of pour it. So you should see a nice pale pink colour emerging. So I've got my mould here, and it's got my dry white layer in it, and it's important that it is pretty much fully dry so that when you pour the hot wax it's not going to melt it and kind of all merge together. So do be patient. It is a patience thing, the ombre candle. Okay, so I'm gonna pour my light pink layer on top. Again, just up to the second layer. You probably can just go ahead and pour your full 50 grams in, and that should bring you exactly right. And there we go. And now we just need to leave that to set as before, and then we'll do our third layer. So for the last layer, I have weighed out 70 grams this time of the wax. It'll become apparent why we do slightly more on the last layer. And I've melted it just the same as before in my double boiler. And then I'm gonna add the rest of my pink dye. Now you don't necessarily need to add all of the dye, but you're gonna add a lot more than we did on the last layer because we want it a little bit darker. So let me just see. Maybe something like that, that's probably quite good. Pop it in. Oops. Give it a good mix, make sure it's all nice and combined. And then grab my mold, which has got my last layer, and that is fully set now. And yeah, just gonna pour it right up to the top. Now when you get to the top, you'll notice you've got a little bit of melted wax left in your pot. Keep that. You can either pour it into another container or just leave it to kind of set in the pot. Once this layer's dry, we'll remelt this, and if we've got any sinkage, we'll just top up the back just to make sure it's nice and flat before we take it out of the mold. So pop this to one side just now, let this set, and then we'll revisit it in a couple of minutes. Once your final layer has dried, if you've got any sinkage, you can just top up the back with a little bit more of that wax that you had left. So just remelt that in the pot. It might have dried, but just pop it back in your double boiler and remelt it. Should be the same shade because it is from the same batch. Remove your peg and then just pour that last little bit into the mold, just to top up any sinkage. If you don't have sinkage, that's fine. You don't have to do this, but if you do, you can just top it up like that. That shouldn't take long to set at all because it's just a little layer there on the back. And then our candle is ready to pop out. So obviously you can repeat all those steps with your green dye or whatever other colours you're using. And while that's setting, I'm going to show you quickly how to make a solid colour candle in case you fancy that as an option. So here I've got 170 grams of wax, so we're just melting it all as one this time, and I'm going to melt it in my double boiler exactly the same as we've done for the ombre candle. So I've melted down all my wax and it's now nice and liquid. And I'm going to add some of my green dye or whatever colour dye you're using. Now I want a kind of mid-green colour, so to my 170 grams of wax I'm going to add, I don't know, this much, maybe a little bit less actually, that'll be quite dark. But you could add a tiny bit just for a pastel shade, or add a bit more if you want a really strong shade. And just make sure that you mix it all around as ever. Be careful because the wax is hot. Yeah, that'll give us a kind of a mid to light shade there. Looks good. So I've got my mold here set up as before, and I've got my melted wax with my green dye in it. And this time we're just going to pour it all the way up to the top. So as before, if you've got any wax left in your jug, just leave it in the jug to set, and then you can remelt it. And if you've got any sinkage on the top there, you can top it up with this melted wax and it'll be the same colour. So my candle is now fully set. I've done any top ups I need to, and I've let it set overnight. Letting it set overnight is ideal because that lets it fully set. Don't rush into taking it out of the mould or you'll be disappointed when bits start to fall off your candle. So this one's ready to take out the mould. So I'm just going to start gradually pulling the sides away, kind of loosening it off. Then you can carefully just start to pop it out of the mould. Do be careful when you're doing this. There we go. And there is my bubble candle. Now what you can do is you can trim off this here. Obviously that's not going to sit very flat, so we're going to take some scissors and just trim off the bottom like that. Push it down. Just sitting flat. So there you have it. We've got our solid colour green here and our ombre pink, but you could mix and match or do both ombre. I've cut my wick to about 1 centimetre in length. This is a perfect length for burning. Any longer and it starts to flicker a lot. And that is it. That is how to make bubble candles from scratch. Obviously never leave a lit candle unattended. But if you did enjoy this project, please do share your bubble candles with us on Instagram and Facebook. We are at the Edinburgh Craft Club.